I think my memory was wiped. I was driving from the beach in San Diego to Reno, Nevada to visit a friend, which is a 10 to 12-hour drive, not including traffic in Los Angeles. It was late at night in the mountain areas of Bridgeport, California, going towards Reno. I saw a bright light behind me. I thought it was a police car with the high beam on, and I was wondering why it was messing with me. It got closer and got brighter and brighter until it was so bright I couldn't even look in my rear view or side mirror. The next thing I remember is a parking lot, parallel to the highway. I was driving 60 miles before where I saw this light, and my friend called me on the phone and asked me what I was doing and that I wasn't coming anymore as it had been 3 days, and I said, "What are you talking about? I've been driving the whole time. I'm on my way. I may have taken a nap for a couple hours," and repeated, "Don't bother coming if you're partying or in a hotel room having fun with girls." I thought he was crazy and told him it wasn't what I thought. I drove anyway, and it was actually a 3-day trip that should have taken 10 hours. And I don't remember anything other than standing in a municipal parking lot parallel to the road I was on. Wow. I was sitting in the driver's seat, and I don't remember anything other than that. And a light coming up behind me at night. It was broad daylight now. I was sitting there, and the car was stopped, and I was surrounded by freight trucks and a little vending machine, and it was the only civilian vehicle stopped there, and I was wondering what the heck I was doing here and how I got there. I only told one person about it, about a year later, and he had stated that it was a classic abduction story. My brother is a member of Mensa, which is a club for the top 1% of people of intelligence or with the highest IQ, in the United States or in the world, as well as being a former USAF graduate and a U.S. Air Force officer for many years. I still don't know what happened during those 3 days, but looking back, I sincerely believe that we are not alone.
Haunted by a ghost. Experience. In 2014, when I was a teenager, I still lived in my small hometown in Europe, Bulgaria. My childhood friends, 2 boys and a girl, and I would occasionally walk along a highway that wasn't used that often. Most of the time we would see some trucks passing by, but there wasn't much traffic, and it was very close to where we lived, so it was something we did often. On the left side there were houses, and on the right there was a huge empty field with some hills here and there, but most of the land was empty, full of grass. On the right side where the field was, there was an old abandoned canal that wasn't used since the early 90s. It was full of rubbish branches, and it was also used to dispose of bones from farm animals like goats and sheep. But there weren't that many. Creepy, yes, but we knew they were from animals. We had visited it before during the day. Nothing impressive really, just an empty canal. One normal night, we decided to take another walk on this road, and we went all the way to the end once and then came back. So we got bored because we always do the same thing. Someone gave the idea to go down the small dirt road next to the abandoned canal, and we didn't think much of it. Now, keep in mind that there are streetlights on the road, but on the small dirt road next to this canal, there is no light coming from anywhere. It was a full moon as far as I remember, as it wasn't a dark night, and we could see where we were going without using our phones to light ourselves. Anyway, we were walking, joking, laughing, and just having a good time. One of the guys was ahead of us because he walked faster. Me. The other guy and the other girl were behind him, walking a bit slower. In the middle of the dirt road, the 3 of us decided to go back to the well-lit area of the road and called the other guy to come back too. A few minutes passed, and the first guy in front was almost at the end of the dirt road when he started running towards us, yelling, "Guys, run!" So instinctively we all turned around to see what was going on and froze. We saw him running really fast towards us, and there was something behind him following him. Everyone reacted quickly and ran towards the road, except for me, who stood there for a few more seconds, trying to figure out what we were witnessing. It's very hard to describe. It was a figure, somehow glowing with a bright white light, and moving up and down, coming towards us. When I realized I couldn't understand what I was seeing, I turned my back on him and ran so fast that I even passed the others even though they started running before me. We didn't stop until we reached the streetlights, and when we did, we turned around. There was nothing behind us anymore. At first we were terrified, but then we just dropped the subject and never spoke of it again. None of us shared this with anyone outside of our childhood group, as we thought people would start spreading rumors that we were doing substances, etc., as it was a very small town. A couple of years went by, we grew up, and everyone started moving to the bigger cities in the area. So at one point, I was the only person from our childhood group left in our hometown, as I was the youngest of the four of us. This happened in 2017. I was outside in my hometown with some friends, a completely different group of people who were never close to my childhood friends at any point. We started talking about random stuff. Then it got dark outside, and one of the guys suggested that we should share scary stories. He then started talking and told me that recently he and 3 other guys had been hanging out at night by the dirt road next to the abandoned canal. At this point, I was all ears. He then proceeded to describe how the exact same thing had happened to them, how they were hanging out there and suddenly a strange figure, a glowing white thing, came towards them. They freaked out, ran away, and then when they looked back, the figure had disappeared. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My jaw dropped. I then told him that a couple of years ago myself and 3 other people experienced the exact same thing, in the exact same location, and I asked him if any of these people had talked to him about this, and if this was some kind of joke, but it wasn't. The story doesn't exactly end here. I came home that night, still in a daze and barely sleeping. I kept remembering what happened years ago and trying to understand things, but I didn't think of anything that made sense. What we experienced was just inexplicable. So the next day, I decided to share everything with my parents, and I thought they would just ignore it, say we were too scared and had imagined something. But to my surprise, they both looked at me in horror. I asked them why they didn't say anything and just stared at me. And then they told me that in the early 90s, when they themselves were teenagers, 2 children went missing, a 7-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. Before they went missing, these children lived right next to our apartment, in the house that overlooked our balcony. Since it is a small town, everyone thought they would find the children soon, but 5 years passed and there was no sign of them. No one had heard anything. There was no suspicion that someone had taken them, and no clues as to what happened to them. Then, on the 5th year of their disappearance, their remains were found in the abandoned canal, and from the evidence found there, it was concluded that they had been killed, but the psychopath was never found. My parents said that this event shook the community back then, and many people avoided going near that canal since it happened. But curious teenagers would visit it from time to time and share stories of how they had seen something unexplainable. However, no one believed them. To this day, when I visit my hometown and pass by the canal, I feel so uneasy that I can't even think of continuing down the dirt road after knowing what really happened there. Were their souls those things that were chasing us that night?
The Ghost Light of St. Louis. This city in Saskatchewan is often confused with its namesake in the United States, namely St. Louis. Despite its small size and remote location, about 30 kilometers from Prince Albert, this city has gained a reputation for its mysterious ghost light. The locals are very familiar with this phenomenon, and it seems to be a matter of common knowledge among them. My cousin decided to take me on an adventure to witness this phenomenon firsthand. I was full of anticipation, as many people have witnessed it before, but its origin remains a mystery. Eventually, we turned off the main road and embarked on a gravel road, which we drove for about 15 kilometers. Next to this gravel road, there was another road, albeit narrower and treacherous, but still accessible. The car was constantly shaken by the trees brushing against it and the potholes, the darkness enveloping us. My cousin took me to the exact spot where I had previously seen the elusive light. A feeling of unease began to creep over me. At first, we remained inside the car, with the engine off, looking out the back window in anticipation of any approaching movement. However, nothing moved. With flashlights in hand, we carefully climbed out of the vehicle and waited patiently. After about 5 minutes, a faint glimmer emerged from the depths of the darkness ahead of us. The road we were on was quite narrow, filled with hills and potholes. However, amidst the darkness, a peculiar sight caught my attention. I could see a light approaching us from a distance. It looked like a single headlight, shining brightly. The strange thing about this light was that it would flash on and off and then disappear, almost as if someone was walking down the street with a flashlight. We both began to feel a sense of unease and decided to retreat to the safety of our car. From there, we watched as the light grew ever closer. Finally, we could bear it no longer and hurriedly drove back to Prince Albert, leaving the eerie place behind. To our knowledge, This particular lighting has been around for a considerable time. Later, we discovered that the road was once used as a railway track. Another story we came across tells of an incident many years ago where a person was crossing the tracks, clutching a lantern, and was tragically struck down by an oncoming train. It is believed that the apparition of this unfortunate soul continues to roam the tracks during the night hours.
The ghost gas station. I spent my 20s traveling a lot. I worked part-time for an import car company that did car shows all over the South. Several times a year I would drive from Florida to Kentucky, Tennessee to Georgia, all over the place. Often on these trips I would end up taking some weird country or county roads to avoid the highways early in the morning. Worst trip of my life. 3 things happened that I can't explain. The first happened around 1 a.m. My GPS tells me to take the closest exit onto a side road off the interstate. It's nothing but farmland and trees, but my GPS swears it's a shortcut. I was driving for about 5 minutes when an old Mustang pulled up behind me flashing its lights. They stitched up behind me for about 15 minutes, but there was nowhere to stop in the middle of all the countryside. They sped up and I thought they were finally going to pass me since there was no oncoming traffic. We were the only ones on the road for miles, but the car never passed me. I physically turned my head to check and the car was gone. There was no turnoff or area where they had stopped, it just disappeared. When I got back on the interstate, 30 minutes had passed, but I was back on the same entrance I had taken to exit. I had been on a long, straight, dark road for 30 minutes and ended up exactly where I had started. I exit the interstate onto a county road that leads to the highway my house was on. It was a local shortcut I had taken many times, just 2 towns away from mine. It was a little after 3 a.m. I went to get a cigarette to keep me awake the last leg of the trip, and my lighter ran out. As I went to put the cigarette back in the pack, I saw a dimly lit gas station. Perfect. I pulled into the parking lot and decided to fill up. While I was at the pump, I saw that there were 2 people inside. An older, grandmotherly-looking woman at the register and a big, red-necked guy in the aisle. They looked at each other like they were having a conversation, but neither of them moved. I walked in a little scared and walked up to the register looking for a lighter. I didn't see one, so I asked the woman in front of me if she had one. She looked at me like I was speaking Chinese to her. I tried to explain that I just wanted a lighter for my cigarettes, and she said, "What? I have matches, if that's what you're looking for." She handed me a box of matches and charged me for them. I thanked her and turned to leave when I noticed that the man still hadn't moved, but I could feel him staring at me. He was 19 or 20 years old and weighed 120 pounds, kind of skinny. The hair on the back of my neck stands up and my brain screams at me to get out of there. I quickly get to my car and the exact moment I turn the engine on, all the lights in that gas station go out. Inside, outside, the pumps, the streetlight. It's pitch black except for my headlights. My tires screeched and I ran out of that gas station as fast as I could. I kept that box of matches for years to solidify in my mind that that experience actually happened. Every time I came back to that county road, I looked for that gas station and never saw it again. At this point, I'm scared and beyond exhausted. I had been awake for 2 days and was tired of seeing the road for so long. I'm still on the same road, but I'm a long way from the gas station and I'm still trying to get it out of my mind when all of a sudden I see blue lights behind me. Now, my father was a police officer for 26 years. I remember the year the police siren went from the old school rotating lights to the new LED bar lights we all know. This hellish road trip was probably around 2016, and behind me was the old school rotating police light. It was too dark to see what kind of car they were in, I just saw something blue. Luckily, I had a friend who was a deputy sheriff a couple towns away and I called her, knowing she worked night shifts and would still be awake. I asked her if she knew of any departments that still use these old lights, and she told me that no one in the entire state has them. She told me to keep driving until I saw a public place to stop, but absolutely not to stop where the road was empty. I drove for a full 30 minutes keeping my friend on the phone with me. The blue lights were behind me the whole way. I finally got to the junction where the county road meets the highway. I'm almost 20 minutes from my house. I pulled into a very well-lit gas station at the intersection, a gas station I stopped at almost every day on my way to work and felt very comfortable at. The blue lights behind me suddenly went out and the car sped off too fast for me to get the license plate or a good description. I pulled into the gas station, bought a Red Bull and a pack of cigarettes at the gas station. A little woman at the gas station whose familiar face and friendly smile made me feel like I had been warmly welcomed back to reality. I got home that morning and checked all the doors several times before falling asleep. Shortly after, I stopped traveling with the car show. To this day, I hate driving alone. I always take a friend or my dog on long road trips. And no matter what the GPS says, I stick to the highways and interstates. I have only told this story to 2 or 3 people over the years for fear they wouldn't believe me. I still swear I fell into a time warp or maybe an alternate dimension. I am now married to my police officer friend, and she remembers that event very clearly as she was on the phone with me several times during that night. We only talked about it once.
Do you like ghost children? There is a stretch of Highway 1 Tam and Stinson Beach where drivers should not stop for any children they see on the road after midnight. They are said to be the ghosts of children who died in a school bus accident in the 1950s. Once, a few years ago, a group of teenagers from San Rafael decided to take a drive along the scenic road. They loved the beautiful coastline and were eager to spend time together, enjoying the view and smoking. Then they saw a group of children playing on the side of the road. The teenagers were not worried. They assumed that the children had run away and were playing near their homes. But as they got closer, they realized that something was not right. These children looked pale, their eyes completely black, and their clothes were out of fashion, as if they were from another era. They were all looking in the same direction, not saying a sound. The teenagers felt uneasy. Something was not right. They decided to slow down, but they didn't stop. They had heard warnings about these kids. As they drove away, the teens looked back and saw the kids disappear into the shadows. Suddenly, the road went dark. The car's headlights flickered. The teens screamed. Then the car went silent. They sat in the dark for several minutes before the car started up again, and the engine roared to life. As the car sped away, these teens realized they had survived the ghostly encounter. They know they will never take that stretch of Highway 1 again after midnight.